The gunshot split the dawn air like thunder as Lillian Montgomery hiked up her skirts and ran faster than she ever had in her 22 years of life. The Wyoming Territory stretched before her, wild and vast in the summer of 1875, offering both terror and promise as she fled from the man her father had sold her to for $500 and a business partnership. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but Lillian didn't slow. Behind her, she could hear the angry shouts of Mr. Thaddeus Blackwell, a man 30 years her senior with cruel eyes and hands that had already left bruises on her wrists during their brief courtship. Their wedding was to be tomorrow, but Lillian had made her choice under the cover of darkness. She would rather face the untamed West alone than spend a lifetime as that man's possession. "You cannot run forever, Lillian," Blackwell's voice carried across the rugged landscape. "Your father signed the contract. You are mine by law." Lillian's lungs burned as she pushed deeper into the forest that bordered the small mining town she'd called home for only 3 months. Her family had moved west after her mother's death, her father chasing rumors of silver and a fresh start. Instead, he'd found whiskey and gambling debts, and Lillian had become the currency to pay them. The forest grew denser, the early morning light barely penetrating the canopy of pine trees. She had taken nothing but the clothes on her back, a small knife tucked into her boot, and the locket containing her mother's portrait. Freedom had been worth leaving everything else behind. Hours passed as Lillian pushed forward, her pace slowing as exhaustion took hold. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but she knew better than to believe she was truly safe. Blackwell was a man who collected debts and trophies. He would not surrender his claim easily. When Lillian finally broke through the trees onto a dirt road, her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in painful gasps. The sleeve of her dress stained crimson where the bullet had torn through fabric and flesh. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart seize with terror. Had they circled around? Found her trail? With trembling legs, she forced herself upright and stumbled toward a cluster of boulders beside the road, praying they would conceal her from whoever approached. The rider appeared around the bend, a lone figure on a magnificent chestnut stallion. Not Blackwell or his men, but a stranger whose broad shoulders and worn leather duster marked him as a man who belonged to these wilds. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Lillian could see the strong line of his jaw and the alertness in his posture as he scanned the road ahead. The horse slowed, and the man's head turned toward her hiding place with unnerving accuracy. Lillian held her breath, pressing herself tighter against the cold stone. "I can see you there, miss," the man called out, his voice deep but lacking the threatening edge she'd come to expect from men. "Are you hurt?" Lillian remained silent, weighing her options. She was miles from anywhere, injured and growing weaker by the minute. The rider dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He approached slowly, hands visible at his sides. As he drew closer, Lillian could see his face clearly younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with eyes the color of a summer storm and features weathered by sun and wind. "I'm not looking to cause trouble," he said, "but you're bleeding, and there's not another soul for 20 miles in any direction. Let me help you." "How do I know you're not working for him?" Lillian demanded, her voice hoarse from exertion and fear. The man stopped, giving her space. "Working for who?" "Thaddeus Blackwell." Something shifted in the man's expression, a hardening around the eyes, a tightening of his mouth. "I don't work for any man, least of all Blackwell. Name's Zachary Walsh. Most folks call me Zach. I run cattle on the North Range." Lillian hesitated, searching his face for deception and finding none. "He wants to marry me. My father arranged it without my consent." Zach nodded slowly, as if this explanation made perfect sense. "And you decided otherwise?" "Yes." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good for you." He gestured to her arm. That needs tending. My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. You're welcome to shelter there until you decide your next move. Lillian knew the folly of trusting strangers, especially men, but the wilderness offered no alternatives. She was losing blood, had no supplies, and Blackwell's men could still be searching. With reluctance born of necessity, she stepped out from behind the boulders. I accept your offer, Mr. Walsh, but understand this eye will not be passed from one man to another like property. The first sign that your intentions are dishonorable, and I'll be gone. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. Fair enough, and it's just Zach. He removed his duster and held it out to her. For warmth and to hide that blood. Can you ride? Lillian took the coat, surprised by its weight and the lingering warmth of its owner. I can ride, Mr. Walsh. Zach. I grew up on a farm in Ohio before my father dragged us west. He helped her onto his horse, his touch impersonal and brief, then swung up behind her, maintaining a respectful distance despite the necessary proximity. My ranch hands know better than to ask questions, he said as they set off. But I should warn you, my sister lives with me. Lucy's got a sharper tongue than most men's knives, but she's handy with bandages and keeps secrets better than a priest. Lillian felt a measure of tension leave her shoulders at the mention of another woman. Your sister lives on the frontier with you? Our parents died in a cholera outbreak 5 years ago. Lucy refused to go east to our aunts. Said she'd rather face Indians and rattlesnakes than Boston society. There was unmistakable affection in his voice. She runs the house like a general and terrorizes the ranch hands for fun. Despite everything, Lillian found herself smiling. She sounds formidable. That's one word for her. The warmth in his tone belied any criticism. Rest if you can. I'll keep you safe. It was a promise Lillian had heard too many times to trust, but exhaustion overruled caution. As the horse's steady gait lulled her, she found herself leaning back against Zach's chest, her eyes growing heavy. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the solid strength of the arm that carefully steadied her and the surprising gentleness with which he held her upright. When Lillian next opened her eyes, she was lying in a bed with crisp sheets, her wounded arm bandaged, wearing a nightgown that was not her own. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating a modestly furnished but comfortable bedroom. A woman with dark blonde hair pulled into a practical bun sat in a chair nearby, a book open in her lap. Finally awake, are you? The woman closed her book and leaned forward. She had the same storm-gray eyes as her brother, but where his face was all hard angles, hers was softer, with a dusting of freckles across her nose. I'm Lucy Walsh. You've been sleeping for nearly a day. Lillian struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her arm. A day? But relax. You're safe here. Zach's got men watching the approaches to the ranch, and Blackwell's crowd wouldn't dare trespass on Walsh land anyway. Lucy poured water from a pitcher and offered it to Lillian. Drink this, then we'll talk about how you ended up shot and running through the wilderness in a wedding dress. Lillian glanced down at the nightgown in confusion. This isn't what I was wearing. No, you were wearing what was left of a white dress. Not exactly practical for fleeing a forced marriage. Lucy's direct gaze held no judgment. I changed you myself. The dress is beyond saving. I'm afraid. Blood and pine sap are a terrible combination. Thank you, Lillian said, accepting the water and drinking deeply. For everything. Lucy shrugged, but her expression softened. Anyone running from Thaddeus Blackwell has my sympathy. The man's a vulture. Half the businesses in Clearwater Springs only exist because he squeezed the original owners dry. You know him? Unfortunately. Lucy's mouth twisted with distaste. He offered for me 2 years ago, despite being old enough to be my father. Zach suggested he might find breathing difficult if he ever approached me again. This unexpected alliance made Lillian's throat tight with emotion. My father owed him money. He arranged the marriage to clear his debts. Lucy's expression darkened. Men like that deserve each other. You, however, deserve better than being traded like cattle. She stood and smoothed her skirts. There's a wash basin if you'd like to freshen up. I've left some of my clothes in the wardrobe. They might be a bit short, you're taller than me, but they're clean. When you're ready, come down for food. You must be starving. After Lucy left, Lillian rose carefully and crossed to the window. The view took her breath away, rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, dotted with cattle and bordered by stands of pine. The ranch house itself sat on a gentle rise, giving it a commanding view of the surrounding territory. A bunkhouse and barn stood nearby, with corrals and outbuildings completing the settlement. It was larger and more established than she had expected. After washing and dressing in the borrowed clothes, a practical skirt and shirtwaist that, as predicted, showed more of her ankles than was strictly proper, Lillian made her way downstairs. She followed the sound of voices to a large kitchen where Lucy was placing plates on a sturdy wooden table. Zach stood by the window, talking with an older man whose weathered face spoke of decades under the western sun. All three turned as she entered. The older man removed his hat, revealing a shock of white hair. "Miss, it's good to see you up and about. Frank Miller, foreman of the W. Lillian Montgomery," she replied, feeling strangely formal after being unconscious in these people's home. "Thank you for your hospitality." "No need for thanks," Zach said, his eyes taking in her appearance with a flicker of something she couldn't identify. "Sit, eat. We were just discussing the situation." Lillian took the offered chair, noting how Zach remained standing until she was seated. It was a small courtesy, but one that spoke of his upbringing. "What situation, exactly?" "Blackwell's men were in Clearwater Springs yesterday, asking questions," Frank said, accepting a cup of coffee from Lucy. "Offering a reward for information about a kidnapped bride, making it sound like you were taken against your will." Cold fear washed over Lillian. "He won't give up, will he?" "Not likely," Zach said, his voice steady. "Blackwell doesn't lose. Not property, not money, and certainly not a woman he considers his due." "I'm not his due," Lillian said sharply, then flushed at her own vehemence. Zach's mouth curved slightly. "No, you're not. But he thinks otherwise, and that makes him dangerous." He exchanged a look with Frank. "We need to send word to Sheriff Daniels. Make sure he knows the truth before Blackwell twists it further." "I'll ride in tomorrow," Frank said. "Less suspicious than you going, given the circumstances." Lucy set a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before Lillian. "Eat. You'll need your strength." As they discussed plans, Lillian found herself studying Zach. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, the faint scar that ran along his jawline, the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck where it was too long, the strength in his hands as he gestured to emphasize a point. He was handsome in a rugged way that had nothing to do with fashion or society's ideals, and everything to do with capability and character. When he caught her watching, he didn't look away or smirk as most men might. Instead, he met her gaze steadily, allowing her assessment without challenge or discomfort. It was a strange sort of respect, one that acknowledged her right to form her own opinions. "You should know," Zach said when Frank had left and Lucy was busy at the stove, "that I've had run-ins with Blackwell before. He's been trying to buy parcels of my land for years, the sections with water access. When I refused, accidents started happening. Cattle found dead, fences cut." "Why tell me this?" Lillian asked. "Because sheltering you means escalating a conflict that was already simmering. I need you to understand what you're walking into." His directness was refreshing after months of her father's lies and Blackwell's manipulations. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." The word was immediate and firm. "I'm making sure you have all the facts so your choice is truly your own." Lillian considered this as she ate, savoring food that tasted better than anything she'd had in months. "I have nowhere else to go," she finally admitted. "My father will have washed his hands of me, and I have no other family. But I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Trouble was already at my door," Zach said with a slight smile. "At least now I have a worthy reason to face it." Lucy snorted from her position by the stove. "What my brother is failing to say, Lillian, is that he's been looking for an excuse to take a stand against Blackwell for years. You're just giving him the moral high ground to do it." Zach shot his sister an exasperated look. "Lucy, it's the truth," she interrupted, unrepentant. "And Lillian deserves the truth, doesn't she? Isn't that what you just said?" To Lillian's surprise, Zach laughed, the sound transforming his serious face. "My sister," he told Lillian, "has never learned the art of tact. Why bother with it?" Lucy returned to the table with a pot of coffee. "Life's too short for dancing around what needs saying." She turned to Lillian. "The truth is, you're welcome here for as long as you need. Blackwell is a menace, and any enemy of his is a friend of ours." The simple acceptance in her words made Lillian's eyes sting with unshed tears. It had been so long since anyone had offered her kindness without conditions. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "Both of you." Zach's expression softened. "Rest today. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next steps." The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Lillian's arm healed quickly under Lucy's care, and she insisted on making herself useful around the house. The Walsh Ranch, the Double W, as everyone called it, was a sizable operation with 15 hands, a cook for the bunkhouse, and enough cattle to require constant attention. Lucy, it turned out, managed not only the household but also the ranch's books and correspondence. "Our father believed women should be educated," she explained as she showed Lillian the orderly ledgers. "Taught us both that brains matter more than whether you wear trousers or skirts." It was a radical notion, but one that Lillian embraced eagerly. After years of her father dismissing her opinions and abilities, the Walsh siblings' matter-of-fact respect was like water to parched earth. Zach was often gone from dawn until dusk, returning dusty and tired from working with his men. Yet he always made time to check on Lillian, to sit with her and Lucy after dinner, discussing everything from books to politics to the challenges of ranch life. He never spoke down to her or dismissed her questions, no matter how naive they might be. A week after her arrival, Lillian was hanging laundry in the yard when Zach rode in earlier than usual. His expression was grim as he dismounted and strode toward her. "What's wrong?" she asked, abandoning the sheets. "Blackwell filed charges in Clearwater Springs. Theft and kidnapping." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing in unruly spikes. "Says you stole jewelry from him before fleeing, and that I abducted you to prevent the wedding." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absurd. I took nothing but my mother's locket, and you never even met me before that day. Blackwell doesn't need truth when he has money and influence." Zach's voice was tight with anger. "Sheriff Daniels is holding them off for now. He knows Blackwell's character, but he can't ignore formal charges indefinitely. What do we do?" Zach hesitated, then said, "Frank thinks you should leave the territory. Head to California or Oregon, somewhere beyond Blackwell's reach." The suggestion felt like a physical blow. Lillian had only just found this unlikely sanctuary, these people who treated her like a person rather than property. The thought of leaving made her chest ache with a pain that surprised her in its intensity. "And what do you think?" she asked, searching his face. Something flickered in his eyes and emotion quickly contained. I think running solves nothing. It just postpones the reckoning. Then what's the alternative? We fight. Legally. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. Blackwell's influence rests on people's fear of him. But if enough stand against him testify to his methods, his threats, who would dare? Lillian asked. You've said yourself how powerful he is. Me, Zach said simply. Lucy, Frank, the ranchers whose water he's tried to steal, the shopkeepers he's squeezed. There are more than you think who hate him, they've just never had a rallying point. Lillian shook her head, overwhelmed by what he was suggesting. You would risk everything, your ranch, your reputation, for a woman you barely know? Zach was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. I know enough, he finally said. I know you had the courage to run rather than submit to a life you didn't choose. I know you work from sunrise to sunset without complaint, though you were raised for an easier life. I know you sit with old Pete in the evenings and listen to his stories when everyone else has heard them 100 times. He took another step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. I know that you laugh with your whole body when something truly amuses you, and that you hum to yourself when you think no one's listening. I know the look on your face when you watch the sunset like you're seeing something holy. Lillian couldn't breathe, couldn't look away from the intensity of his gaze. So yes, he continued softly, I would risk everything. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because in a single week you've become someone worth fighting for. Before Lillian could respond to this extraordinary declaration, hoofbeats sounded on the road leading to the ranch. Zach turned, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. A cloud of dust announced multiple riders approaching at speed. Get inside, he ordered, his voice shifting from gentle to commanding in an instant. Find Lucy. Tell her to get the rifle. Lillian gathered her skirts and ran for the house, heart pounding. Lucy was already at the window, rifle in hand, when Lillian burst through the door. Riders coming fast, Lillian gasped. Zach said, I see them. Lucy checked the weapon with practiced efficiency. 5 men. That's not a social call. Through the window, Lillian watched as Zach positioned himself in front of the house, standing his ground as the riders approached. Several ranch hands emerged from the barn and bunkhouse, moving to flank their boss, shotguns and rifles at the ready. The riders slowed as they entered the yard, and Lillian's blood went cold as she recognized the man in the lead. Thaddeus Blackwell sat astride a black gelding, immaculately dressed in a suit that would not have looked out of place in a Denver business meeting. Beside him rode the local deputy, looking uncomfortable, and 3 men whose hard faces and holstered weapons marked them as hired guns rather than lawmen. Walsh, Blackwell called, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. I've come for what's mine. Nothing here belongs to you, Blackwell, Zach replied, his stance relaxed but alert. The woman. Blackwell's cold eyes scanned the house. My bride. The one you stole away. Miss Montgomery came here of her own free will, seeking sanctuary from a forced marriage. Zach's voice remained even. She's under my protection now. Blackwell's face darkened with anger. You have no right. I have every right to offer shelter to someone in need. Zach cut him off. This is my land. You're trespassing. The deputy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Mr. Walsh, there are legal complaints filed against you and the young lady. I'm here to bring you both in to answer them. On what charges exactly, Deputy Morris? Zach asked. Kidnapping and theft for you. Theft and breach of contract for Miss Montgomery. The deputy wouldn't meet Zach's eyes. Mr. Blackwell has a signed marriage contract with her father. A contract Miss Montgomery never agreed to, Zach countered. Last I checked, We don't sell women in Wyoming Territory. The law recognizes paternal authority, Blackwell began. The law recognizes that Miss Montgomery is of legal age and has the right to choose her own husband, Zach interrupted. Whatever arrangement you had with her father, it doesn't bind her. Lucy moved to stand at Lillian's side. You should go out there, she whispered. Show them you're here willingly. It strengthens Zach's position. Lillian hesitated, fear warring with resolve. The thought of facing Blackwell again made her stomach churn. But Lucy was right. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed her hair and stepped onto the porch. The effect was immediate. Blackwell's eyes locked onto her, his expression a disturbing mixture of possessiveness and rage. Lillian, he said, his voice falsely gentle. This foolishness has gone on long enough. It's time to come home. I have no home with you, Lillian replied, proud that her voice didn't tremble. I never agreed to marry you. My father had no right to promise me to anyone. Your father accepted payment, Blackwell snapped, dropping the pretense of affection. $500 and the forgiveness of considerable debts. You were sold and paid for, girl. A murmur ran through the ranch hands at this crude declaration. Even the deputy looked taken aback. Is that true, miss? He asked. Did your father accept payment for you? My father accepted money without my knowledge or consent, Lillian said clearly, stepping forward to stand beside Zach. I learned of the arrangement only when Mr. Blackwell announced our engagement publicly, making it impossible for me to refuse without scandal. She lifted her chin, meeting Blackwell's gaze directly. When I tried to speak with my father privately, to express my unwillingness, Mr. Blackwell prevented it. He kept me under constant watch, detained me against my will. The night before the wedding She faltered, then forced herself to continue. He made it clear what I could expect as his wife, so I fled. She's lying, Blackwell snarled. I treated her with nothing but respect. Is this respect? Zach asked quietly, reaching for Lillian's bandaged arm and carefully pushing up her sleeve to reveal the healing wound. Shooting at an unarmed woman? Is that how you treat someone you claim to want as a wife? The deputy stared at the wound, then at Blackwell. You shot her. A warning shot, Blackwell dismissed. She was stealing my property. I took nothing but the clothes I wore and my mother's locket, Lillian said. A locket that has been mine since childhood. Deputy Morris seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Blackwell, these accusations are irrelevant. Blackwell cut in. I have a signed contract and witnesses who saw Walsh take her from town. The charges stand. He turned to his hired men. Get her. As the men moved to dismount, Zach drew his revolver in one fluid motion. The ranch hands raised their weapons in response, creating a wall of armed resistance. Take one more step toward this house, Zach said, his voice deadly quiet, and it will be the last step you ever take. For a tense moment, no one moved. The only sound was the creak of leather and the soft nickering of horses. It was the deputy who broke the standoff. Mr. Blackwell, I think we should return to town. This situation requires consideration. Are you refusing to execute a lawful warrant? Blackwell demanded. I'm exercising discretion, the deputy replied, finding his backbone at last. There are serious counter-allegations here that need to be addressed before anyone goes taking women at gunpoint. Blackwell's face contorted with fury. You'll regret this, Walsh. All of you. His gaze shifted to Lillian, cold and calculating. Especially you, my dear. No one refuses me. No one. With that, he wrenched his horse around and galloped away, his men following after a moment's hesitation. The deputy lingered, looking troubled. Miss Montgomery, he said, I suggest you come to town voluntarily in the next few days to make a formal statement. It would help clear things up. She'll come when I can guarantee her safety, Zach replied before Lillian could speak. Not before. The deputy nodded, seeming to understand. Fair enough. Good day to you both. He tipped his hat and rode away at a more measured pace than Blackwell's angry retreat. As the tension of the confrontation ebbed, Lillian realized she was trembling. Without thinking, she reached for Zach's hand, needing an anchor. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. You did well, he said softly, for her ears alone. Very well. He'll be back, she whispered. With more men. Official papers. Let him come. Zach's grip on her hand tightened. We'll be ready. The threat of Blackwell's return hung over the ranch like a storm cloud in the days that followed. Zach doubled the night watch and sent riders to neighboring ranches, calling in old favors and alliances. Lucy took to carrying a small derringer in her pocket, and Lillian found herself jumping at shadows, the memory of Blackwell's cold promise haunting her dreams. Yet life continued. Cattle needed tending, meals needed cooking, and the daily rhythms of ranch life couldn't be suspended for fear. If anything, the shared danger seemed to strengthen the bonds between everyone at the Double W. The hands were more protective, Lucy more determined, and Zach was a constant presence, solid and reassuring. 10 days after Blackwell's visit, Frank returned from town with news. Sheriff Daniels is back from his circuit, he reported as they gathered in the ranch house kitchen. He's reviewing the charges, but he's a fair man. Doesn't much like Blackwell. That helps, but it doesn't solve our problem, Zach said, pacing the length of the room. Blackwell has judges in his pocket. Even if Daniels dismisses the charges locally, Blackwell can push it higher. There might be another way, Lucy said slowly. She had been unusually quiet during the discussion, a thoughtful expression on her face. A way to cut the legal ground out from under him completely. All eyes turned to her. Marriage, she said simply. If Lillian were to marry someone else, someone of her own, choosing Blackwell's contract becomes meaningless. You can't force a woman to break existing marriage vows to honor a prior engagement. A heavy silence fell over the room. Lillian felt heat rise to her face as the implications of Lucy's suggestion became clear. Are you proposing I marry for convenience? Again? She finally asked. Trade one arrangement for another? Not at all, Lucy replied, her gaze direct. I'm suggesting you marry for your own reasons, your own choice. But the legal protection such a union would provide is undeniable. Zach had gone very still, his expression unreadable. It would have to be someone Blackwell couldn't intimidate or buy off, he said after a moment. Someone with enough standing to withstand pressure. Frank cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, but there's an obvious candidate in this very room. The air between Lillian and Zach seemed to crackle with sudden tension. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Lillian felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. The idea of marrying Zach even as a legal maneuver sent a rush of confusing emotions through her. Terror and hope, resistance and longing. No, Zach said abruptly, breaking the charged silence. I won't use marriage as a tactical move. Not even for this. He strode from the room, the door closing firmly behind him. Lillian stared after him, an unexpected pain blooming in her chest. Was the thought of marrying her so repulsive that he couldn't even consider it as a strategy? Lucy sighed, watching her brother's retreat with a mixture of exasperation and understanding. Don't take it personally, she told Lillian. Zach has his own history with unwanted arrangements. What do you mean? Lillian asked. Lucy hesitated, then said, It's his story to tell, not mine. But know this, my brother would cut off his own arm before he'd make anyone feel trapped or obligated the way he once was. Frank nodded sagely. The Mitchell girl. That was a mess and a half. Frank, Lucy warned, silencing him with a look. To Lillian, she added, give him time. There are other options we can explore. But as the days passed, those options seemed increasingly limited. Sheriff Daniels sent word that while he personally believed Lillian's account, the formal charges couldn't be dismissed without a hearing. Blackwell, meanwhile, had ridden to Cheyenne to speak with the territorial judge, a man known to be sympathetic to business interests. Zach and Lillian circled each other carefully, their previous easy companionship strained by the unspoken possibility that hung between them. They still talked, still worked alongside each other, but something had shifted, a new awareness that made every glance, every accidental touch, charged with meaning. 2 weeks after Lucy's suggestion, Lillian found Zach alone in the barn late in the evening. He was brushing down his stallion, his movements rhythmic and practiced. For a moment, she simply watched him, noting the careful strength in his hands, the gentleness with which he handled the powerful animal. "Were you going to stand there all night?" he asked without turning, and Lillian realized he had known she was there all along. "I wanted to talk to you," she said, stepping into the lantern light, "about what Lucy suggested." Zach's hands stilled on the brush. "There's nothing to discuss." "I think there is." Lillian moved closer, close enough to smell the familiar scent of him, leather and pine and clean sweat. "You refused even to consider it, and I deserve to know why." He turned to face her then, his expression guarded. "You know why. Marriage should be a choice freely made, not a legal maneuver or a business arrangement. Yet you would risk everything else for me, your ranch, your safety, your future. Why draw the line at marriage?" "Because marriage should mean something," he said with sudden intensity. "It should be sacred, not strategic." Lillian studied him, seeing the conviction in his eyes. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "The Mitchell girl." Zach's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he sighed and set down the brush. "Abigail Mitchell. Her father owned the largest cattle operation in the county before Blackwell arrived. I was 22, just starting to build the Double W. Our fathers decided an alliance would benefit both families. "An arranged marriage," Lillian said. "A business merger with vows," Zach corrected bitterly. "Neither of us had much say in it. Abigail was 19, beautiful, educated back east. I thought." He paused, looking past Lillian as if seeing a different time. "I thought we could make it work. That affection might grow from respect and shared purpose. What happened? She hated it here. Hated the isolation, the work, the dirt. Hated me, I think, for representing everything she wanted to escape." His voice grew quieter. 3 months before the wedding, she ran away with a gambler passing through town. Left a note saying she'd rather die than be buried alive as a rancher's wife. The pain in his voice, even after all these years, made Lillian's heart ache. "I'm sorry. Don't be." She made her choice, the first real choice she'd been allowed. "I respected her for it, even as it stung." He met Lillian's gaze directly. "That's why I won't marry you to solve a legal problem, Lillian. I won't have you look at me years from now with the realization that you traded one cage for another." "Is that what you think it would be?" Lillian asked, stepping closer still. "A cage? Any marriage born of necessity carries that risk. And if it wasn't born of necessity?" The words came before she could reconsider them. "If it was born of something else?" Zach went very still, his eyes searching her face. "What are you saying?" Lillian took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I'm saying that in the weeks I've been here, I've come to know you, Zachary Walsh. Your integrity, your kindness, the way you treat every person from your sister to the youngest ranch hand with respect. The way you've treated me as someone with value beyond what I could offer a man. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. I've watched you work from dawn until dusk, then still find energy to read to Lucy when her eyes are tired. I've seen your patience with old Pete, your gentleness with injured animals, your unwavering sense of justice. She took another step forward, close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. So yes, marriage to you would solve my legal problems. But that's not why I would consider it. Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. I would consider it because I find myself thinking of you when you're not near. Because your opinion matters to me more than it reasonably should. Because when you smile, truly smile, not that polite version you give strangers, it feels like sunrise after a long night. Zach's expression had transformed as she spoke, disbelief giving way to something that made her heart race, a tenderness, a hunger, a hope he seemed unable to disguise. Lillian, he said, her name a rough caress in his voice. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she interrupted. That's the point. For the first time in my life, I'm making choices because I want to, not because I must. And I find myself wanting. Her courage faltered briefly, then rallied. I find myself wanting you. The confession hung in the air between them, irrevocable. For a terrible moment, Zach didn't move, and Lillian feared she had catastrophically misread the situation. Then, slowly, he raised his hand to her face, his fingers feather light against her cheek. I have wanted you, he said, voice low and fervent. Since I saw you standing defiant by those boulders, bleeding but unbowed, I have wanted you every day since, with a force that terrifies me. His thumb traced the curve of her lower lip. But I need to be certain, absolutely certain, that this isn't gratitude or practicality disguised as something more. It isn't, Lillian whispered, leaning into his touch. Test me if you must. Wait if you need to. But know that my feelings are my own, freely given. In answer, Zach lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. But when Lillian responded, her hands rising to his shoulders, her body swaying toward his, it deepened into something more profound. His arms encircled her, strong but careful, as though she were precious and might break or flee if held too tightly. Lillian had been kissed before, awkward, fumbling encounters with boys from her hometown, and later Blackwell's possessive claiming of her mouth, but never like this. Never as though the kiss itself was a conversation, an exchange of promises and possibilities. Never with this sweet, building heat that made her forget everything but the man holding her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Zach rested his forehead against hers. If we do this, he said, it won't be just to thwart Blackwell. It will be real, permanent. I would accept nothing less, Lillian replied, her hands still on his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. The sound of approaching footsteps made them step apart, though Zach kept one of her hands in his. Lucy appeared in the barn doorway, her expression shifting from concern to knowing amusement as she took in their flushed faces and clasped hands. Well, she said, it's about time, but you might want to continue this particular conversation inside. Rider coming fast from town, it's Deputy Morris. The news sobered them instantly. Hand in hand, they followed Lucy back to the house, where they found the deputy already dismounting, his expression grave. Mr. Walsh, Miss Montgomery, he called as they approached. I'm afraid I bring unwelcome news. Judge Harrington has issued a writ ordering Miss Montgomery's return to Clearwater Springs to answer charges. If she doesn't appear voluntarily within 3 days, he's authorized Blackwell to come with a posse to collect her. On what grounds? Zach demanded. Sheriff Daniels has been overruled, Morris finished wearily. Blackwell went over his head. The territorial judge signed the order this morning. Lillian's grip on Zach's hand tightened. What happens if I appear voluntarily? You'll be held until a hearing can be arranged. Given the nature of the charges and Blackwell's influence, the deputy didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what would happen. Once in custody, Lillian would be vulnerable to whatever legal maneuvering Blackwell had planned. 3 days, Zach said, his mind clearly working rapidly. That gives us time. Time for what? Morris asked. Zach glanced at Lillian, a question in his eyes. She nodded, the decision already made in her heart. Time to get married, Zach said, turning back to the deputy. As her husband, I would have legal standing to contest any prior contract made without her consent. Morris blinked in surprise, then a slow smile spread across his weathered face. Well, now that does change things. He looked between them carefully. This isn't just a legal strategy, is it? No, Lillian said firmly. It is not. The deputy nodded, satisfied. Good. I'd hate to think I rode out here at risk to my job just to enable another forced arrangement. He remounted his horse. I'll tell the sheriff you'll be coming to town together to file the proper paperwork. That should buy you some time before Blackwell gets wind of it. After he had gone, Lucy turned to them with hands on hips. You realize what this means? We have to organize a wedding in less than 3 days. It doesn't need to be elaborate, Lillian began, but Lucy waved her objection away. Nonsense. If my brother is finally getting married after all these years, and to a woman who actually suits him, we're doing it properly. Her eyes gleamed with determination. Besides, the more witnesses, the better. We want everyone to know this was a choice freely made. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word spread quickly among neighboring ranches, and offers of help poured in, women bringing food and decorations, men promising to stand guard in case Blackwell tried to intervene. It seemed Zach and Lucy had more friends than they realized, and Blackwell more enemies. The wedding itself was set for sunset on the 3rd day, to be held in the meadow behind the ranch house where wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of yellow and purple. The local minister, a stout man with kind eyes who had known the Walsh family for years, agreed to perform the ceremony. Are you certain? He asked Lillian privately when he arrived, his concern genuine. Marriage is not a shield to be taken up lightly. I have never been more certain of anything, Lillian told him honestly. I would marry Zachary Walsh if Thaddeus Blackwell had never existed. The minister studied her face, then nodded, satisfied. Good. I've known Zach since he was a boy. He deserves happiness after all he's endured. On the morning of the wedding, Lucy presented Lillian with a dress not white, which would have reminded her too much of the one she'd fled in, but a soft blue that brought out the gold in her brown eyes. It was our mother's, Lucy explained as she helped Lillian into it. Her special occasion dress. She would have loved you wearing it. Tears pricked Lillian's eyes at the gesture. Lucy, I don't know what to say. Say you'll be good to my brother, Lucy replied, her usual briskness softened by emotion. Say you'll make this house a home again. I will, Lillian promised, embracing the woman who had become like a sister to her in such a short time. With all my heart. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, turning the sky to gold and amber, Lillian stood at the edge of the meadow. Music from a fiddle and harmonica drifted on the evening breeze, and lanterns had been hung from the trees, waiting for darkness to make them glow. Nearly 50 people had gathered, ranch hands, neighbors, shopkeepers from town, all standing in defiance of Blackwell's influence. Frank appeared at her side, offering his arm. Miss Lillian, it would be my honor to walk with you if you'll have me. Emotion closed Lillian's throat. She had assumed she would walk alone, having no family to give her away. I would be grateful, she managed. As they began their walk through the meadow, all eyes turned to them. But Lillian saw only Zach, waiting for her beside the minister. He had traded his work clothes for a clean black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that caught her heart, a look of such open wonder and joy that it erased any lingering doubt she might have harbored. This was no marriage of convenience. This was a choice freely made by both of them. When she reached him, Zach took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "You are beautiful," he said softly, "for her ears alone, and brave, and everything I never dared hope for." The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They spoke traditional vows, their voices clear and unwavering. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes and cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting under the stars. Sheriff Daniels himself arrived halfway through the evening, bringing news that Judge Harrington was reconsidering his writ in light of the marriage. "Blackwell's furious," the sheriff told them with undisguised satisfaction. "But there's little he can do now. A wife cannot be compelled to honor her father's contract against her husband's wishes. That's established law even in the territories." "He won't give up easily," Zach cautioned, his arms secure around Lillian's waist. "He hates to lose." "Let him try," the sheriff replied. "There are more people willing to stand with you than you might think. Blackwell's power has always rested on fear and isolation. Together, folks are finding their courage." It was near midnight when the last guests departed and the newly married couple finally found themselves alone. Lucy had tactfully announced her intention to spend the night with a neighbor, giving them privacy in the ranch house that was now Lillian's home as well. In the quiet of their bedroom, Zach's room, now transformed by the addition of Lillian's few possessions and fresh flowers that Lucy had arranged earlier, a moment of shyness overtook them both. "We can wait," Zach said gently, sensing her nervousness. "There's no rush." Lillian shook her head, reaching for the pins that held her hair. "I don't want to wait. I want to be your wife in every way." She met his gaze steadily. Blackwell, when he kissed me, was rough, demanding. I fear I don't know how it should be." Zach crossed to her, taking her hands and stopping their nervous movement. "Then let me show you," he said, his voice deepening. "Let me help you forget he ever touched you." With infinite patience, he helped her unpin her hair, his fingers gentle as they combed through the long strands. He kissed her as he did so, soft, unhurried kisses that gradually kindled a warmth that spread through her body like wildfire. When he moved to the buttons of her dress, he asked permission with his eyes, waiting for her nod before proceeding. What followed was a revelation to Lillian that physical love could be tender and playful, passionate and sweet by turns. That her body could respond with such joy to another's touch. That this act, which she had feared would be an obligation to endure, could instead be a communion of such profound intimacy that it brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, lying in the circle of Zach's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Lillian felt a peace she had never known. This was what it meant to be chosen, not claimed or purchased or commanded, but selected with care and held with reverence. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, the words coming easily now that she knew their truth in her body as well as her heart. Zach's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Lillian Walsh, more than I have words to express." They fell asleep entwined, husband and wife, not by necessity but by choice, the threat of Blackwell temporarily forgotten in the shelter of newfound love. The honeymoon period was brief. 3 days after the wedding, as Zach and Lillian were sharing breakfast with Lucy, Frank burst into the kitchen, his expression grim. "Ryder's coming," he announced. "Blackwell's at the head, and he's brought at least a dozen men." Zach was on his feet instantly. "Armed to the teeth," Frank confirmed. "Not just his usual thugs, either. Some I don't recognize. Get the men ready, Zach ordered. No one shoots first, but everyone stays alert. Lillian exchanged a look with Lucy, fear and determination mirrored in both their faces. I should be with you, she told Zach as he checked his revolver. Both of you stay inside, he countered. If this goes badly, I want to be at my husband's side, Lillian said firmly. Not hiding while you face danger on my behalf. Lucy nodded in agreement. We're Walshes. We stand together. A complex emotion crossed Zach's face, pride mixed with worry, love tempered by fear for their safety. But he nodded. Stay behind me, both of you, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Together, they stepped onto the porch just as Blackwell's party reached the yard. The contrast was stark. Blackwell and his men mounted on expensive horses, dressed for intimidation rather than work, facing Zach and his ranch hands in their practical clothing, feet planted firmly on their own soil. Walsh, Blackwell called, his voice carrying across the yard. I see the rumors are true. You've stooped to marriage to thwart justice. There's no justice in what you're pursuing, Blackwell, Zach replied evenly. Only your wounded pride. Blackwell's cold gaze shifted to Lillian. Did he tell you about his arrangement with the Mitchell girl, my dear? How she fled rather than marry him? History has a way of repeating itself. I know everything about my husband, Lillian replied, stepping forward to stand beside Zach. Just as he knows everything about me. There are no secrets between us. No arrangements. No coercion. Only choice. Pretty words, Blackwell sneered. But the law recognizes our marriage. Sheriff Daniel's voice cut in as he rode into the yard from the opposite direction, accompanied by several deputies. As I've explained to you repeatedly, Mr. Blackwell, any prior contract is nullified by their legal union. Blackwell's face darkened with fury. This isn't over, Daniels. I still have the ear of the territorial judge. Judge Harrington will be receiving some interesting correspondence in the coming days. The sheriff interrupted. Sworn statements from several businessmen in Clearwater Springs detailing your methods of persuasion. The territorial governor takes a dim view of such practices. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwell's face. Lies, he said, but with less conviction. Truth, the sheriff countered, which you've managed to suppress through fear for too long. Now, I suggest you and your men turn around and head back to town. Unless you'd prefer I arrest you for threatening a legal household with armed men. The standoff stretched for several tense moments, neither side willing to back down. Lillian held her breath, acutely aware of Zach's solid presence beside her, the warmth of his arm where it pressed against hers. Finally, Blackwell jerked his head in a signal to his men. This isn't finished, Walsh, he spat as he turned his horse. You've made an enemy you can't afford. You were my enemy long before I met Lillian, Zach replied calmly. The difference is, now I have something worth fighting for. They watched in silence as Blackwell and his men rode away, the sheriff following at a distance to ensure they left Walsh property. Only when they had disappeared from sight did the tension ease from Zach's shoulders. He'll be back, Lucy said quietly, in some form or another. Yes, Zach agreed, but not today, and we'll be ready when he does come. He turned to Lillian, his eyes searching her face. Are you all right? She nodded, surprised to discover it was true. The fear she had lived with for so long had been replaced by something stronger, not fearlessness, but courage. The courage that came from knowing she was not alone. I'm more than all right, she said, taking his hand. I'm home. In the months that followed, Blackwell made good on his threat to continue his campaign against them. He attempted to block their cattle sales, to turn neighbors against them, to challenge their water rights. But each move was met with resistance not just from the Walshes, but from a community that had grown tired of being controlled by fear. The territorial judge, faced with mounting evidence of Blackwell's corrupt practices, eventually ordered an investigation. While the wheels of justice turned slowly, the very fact of the inquiry weakened Blackwell's position. Businessmen who had once cowered before him began to stand their ground. Ranchers who had been isolated found common cause. And through it all, the W thrived. Under Lillian's careful management, the house became a center of community life. She started a small school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders, teaching reading and arithmetic in the afternoons. Lucy, freed from some household duties, devoted more time to the business side of the ranch, securing better prices for their cattle and expanding their breeding program. Zach watched the transformation of his home with wonder and pride. The ranch that had once been merely a livelihood became a true home, filled with laughter and purpose. When Lillian told him, 6 months after their wedding, that she was expecting their child, his joy was so complete it brought him to his knees, his head resting against her still flat stomach as he whispered promises to their unborn baby. Their daughter, Catherine Lucy Walsh, was born the following spring, a strong, healthy child with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Her arrival cemented what Lillian had already come to know, that the truest freedom came not from running away, but from running toward the right person. Not from refusing all bonds, but from choosing the ones that allowed her to grow rather than diminish. 10 years later, as Lillian stood on the porch of the ranch house watching Zach teach their daughter and twin sons to ride, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Blackwell was long gone, having fled the territory when the investigation into his dealings had turned criminal. The W had expanded, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. Lucy had married a quiet, bookish man who ran the general store in town, giving them nieces and nephews who frequently visited the ranch. But beyond these external changes, it was the internal transformation that mattered most. Lillian had arrived at the W as a frightened runaway, desperate and alone. She had become a wife, a mother, a teacher, a valued member of the community, not because these roles were imposed on her, but because she had chosen them, shaped them to fit her own dreams and abilities. Zach looked up from the corral, catching her eye across the yard. Even after all these years, that simple connection sent warmth spreading through her chest. He smiled, that true smile that still reminded her of sunrise, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice that day in the barn when she had offered him her heart. She had been running from a marriage of obligation, only to discover that real love wasn't a cage, but a door, one that opened onto possibilities she had never imagined. Zachary Walsh hadn't just taught her what it felt like to be chosen freely. He had taught her that she had the right to choose as well, to build a life on her own terms, with a partner who valued her freedom as much as his own. That, Lillian reflected as she went to join her family, was the truest kind of love, not possession, not control, but the daily choice to walk together, side by side, into whatever the future might hold.